Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Mock Interview series at Turing. My name is João. I'm from Brazil. I've been a software developer for quite some time now, with experience in web development with JavaScript, React, Next, and some other languages. Today, we are going to do a mock interview about mobile development with Jose. So, hello, Jose. How are you?
Hi, João. I'm fine. And you?
Doing great, man. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, for sure. So I've been in the developing business for about 14 years. When I graduated college, I started a company here in Mexico, and I developed for different businesses, including schools, hospitals, like manufacturers, a little bit of government. So I've been working in a bunch of different areas, from web development to standalone development. But recently, I have had a little bit of focus on app development. I have had clients that require this. So yeah, that's something that recently has come a little bit stronger. So yeah, that's basically my experience.
Nice. Can you explain me some projects you've been working from, like
Yeah,
specifically with mobile development?
with mobile. Okay. So yeah, this exploded for me a little bit more during pandemic. So one of the projects we developed was for doctors. So they were interested in virtualizing the notion of a waiting room in a hospital to avoid these crowds, right? And avoid having too much people in one spot. So we created this app. It was a native app, both in iOS and Android. And the idea of the app was to track the patients and their appointments with the doctors, so they could schedule the moment at which they would arrive to the waiting room. So that's one. More recently, we have been working with a government agency here in Mexico that is in charge of managing all the teachers from public schools. So the teachers here are unionized, and they have access to different benefits such as savings and loans and yeah, these kind of things. So there is a bunch of information going around. This information is crazy to manage. So we developed a web system that connects with a couple of apps. So we have, again, native apps, Android and iOS. And from these apps, teachers can actually track their information, track their loans, their payments, like all the information around this whole operation.
Oh, that sounds great, man. Actually, I don't know if you use like hybrid development for those cases.
No, in those cases, we work with native apps. Those were for particular reasons, namely, well, something that happens here in Mexico is that people is still not often used to the notion of an app can be anywhere, right? They are still like more traditional in the sense that no, the app has to be in the store, then you have to download it from the store. And even if you tell the client it's the same, right? The functionality is the same, they are still not uh, on that dynamic, I would say. So clients were presented with both options, and they decided the native apps. Also, they are really not concerned about budget in both cases, so budget was not an important thing for them. So yeah, that was their
Okay,
decision.
nice. Okay, so can you tell me what are the advantages of having an hybrid app over native one?
Okay, so there are actually quite very clear advantages of hybrid app, and I should clarify that in here there are two things you're talking about. You have hybrid apps with technologies such as Flutter. That what this is going to do is actually is going to allow you to code just once, and then it's going to create code for different platforms such as Swift in iOS or Kotlin for Android, right? So that's good. There's also another level you can think of that are the progressive apps, which are basically apps coded in as a web page with HTML, JavaScript, and the whole thing, right? So in both cases, the clear advantage of the two cases is that you only code once. So the development cost is cheaper. Also, the maintenance cost is cheaper to support because you only have to support one platform and you don't need like specialized things for iOS and Android. So there are a bunch of advantages in these hybrid apps. Now, in the particular case of my clients, these options were presented to them, and they choose the native app instead. I think the main reason is that budget was not a concern for them really. So I think that's the main advantage, cost, right? So that wasn't really something that was important for them. So yeah, at the end they decided for the native apps. However, I do think hybrid apps have a brighter future than native apps. I think in the future they are going to be consumed more as this development gets accelerated and things are developed just faster and cheaper. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you, man. Great explanation. So let's go deeper into Android development. So can you explain me, don't need to go through it a lot, but just briefly, all the Android applications components?
Okay, yeah. So whenever you are going to develop in Android, the thing that is more important to you are the activities. In Android, everything are like activities, and you may think of activities as screens. Like each screen in your app is going to be an activity with all its code and things that are going to make it work, right? But you also have some other things in Android. For example, if you need something running but not being visible to the user, which is pretty common. So for that, you would use a background service. So you also have these all these services in Android that will allow you to run these kind of things. Um, you also have receivers in Android, and basically receivers will allow Android to interact with other things. Like for example, broadcast receivers are used to communicate with other apps such as WhatsApp. Let's say you want to send a WhatsApp message from your app, you will use a receiver for that. Or also content providers. This work to for interacting with, for example, a database in case you want to save or retrieve some information stored in the device. You will use a content provider for that. So these are all the components you will use in Android.
Great, great. So can you explain me the difference between activity and context?
Yeah. So, well, basically, activities are context. In Android, a context is like a box when you're going to have a bunch of scope over things, over variables, over methods, over stuff. So there are objects such as activities that have context. So the activity has its own context when you can modify elements, items within that interface and those kind of things. However, contexts are much greater. You also have a context, for example, for the whole application, right? So that is used for global variables. If you want to have something accessible in many activities, you would put it in the application context. And the difference is the application context is alive while your application runs, and the activity is only alive when the screen is visible. When you switch to another screen, that you're going to be switching context as well, activity context as well.
Okay, nice, nice. So now a security question about releasing your APK to the world, to the web. How can you stop or at least prevent reverse engineering of the APK?
Well, that's a tricky topic because the thing is your APK is subject to review. If you submit your APK to a store such as Apple Store, App Store, or Play Store for Google, your application is going to be reviewed. And in some cases, well, in my personal experience, I had cases when I submitted encrypted applications and they rejected the applications exactly for those reasons. They told me we need to be able to check your APK to make sure you're not doing something you shouldn't be doing, right? So I mean, like encrypting your whole APK is not something you can do as loosely because you may run into these troubles. However, there are things you can do. For example, code obfuscation is really useful, is used a lot, not only for mobile development, but for any kind of development. Whenever you're going to put a piece of code somewhere and it's critical, you can just obfuscate it. There are a bunch of tools for obfuscation, and that protects your code quite well because it's just going to be average whenever you open it. Also, something important to have in mind is if you use third-party keys, for example, let's say you have an API key for a payment provider or something like that, that kind of information should never be like raw in the code, like hard-coded in the code, because that's pretty sensible. So yeah, I would say you don't really need to encrypt the whole thing. Focus on critical parts in your app, and then obfuscate them or encrypt them whenever necessary.
Great, great. So for React Native, what JavaScript engine is being used for to run React Native apps?
If I recall correctly, React uses the JavaScript core engine, which is basically JavaScript. That's basically.
Yeah, that's it. There's just like if you're developing in a Chrome and you are using V8. But there's a lot of differences in a way. There's some difference, but minor stuff that you sometimes have to be take care of.
Yeah, Chrome for the booking. Yeah, that's right.
Awesome. Next one. What's component-driven development, or CDD?
Yeah. Okay, so in this case, we're talking about a way of developing applications, and this is a modern, like accelerated approach to building apps, and it consists in imagining the app, or again, it's not only for apps. You can also talk about web development or something else. It consists in focusing on the components. So, for example, if you have a screen, you have a bunch of components there, so you focus on each one of them individually. Those act like pieces in a puzzle, so you can code them separately, and at the end just merge them and make sure they work together. Now, why is this important? Because with the new way of developing software using tools like Git and remote work and collaborative work, you may have a bunch of developers working on the same application. So you would want them to be independent, right? Like work with independent components so they don't bottleneck each other, and at the end just like put the puzzle together. So that's basically the way this kind of development works.
Great, great. Another thing that is very nice for it is separation of concern as well, right? Because each component can just focus on the logic necessary for its functionality. But I think your answer encapsulates that as well. Like,
yeah, it's basically to make the development more agile. That's basically it.
That's awesome. Next one, a bit more specific with iOS. So what would be the difference between the protocol in Swift and interfacing Java for Android?
Okay. All right. So in Java, an interface is like a template. So you define a template on how a class should be, right? So you say this class has to have these methods with these parameters, return these kind of values, and any class that wants to implement that interface has to follow that rule, right? A protocol in Swift is basically the same. However, protocols also implement some other stuff, like for example, fields. For the interface in Java, it's not concerned about fields, what fields the class should have. The protocol does specify fields, for example. So it's there has some small differences between the two of them, but they are basically used for the same, to templatize classes.
Awesome, great one. Next one, what is copy on write, or COW, in Swift?
Yeah, so we're talking about, I would say, a routine that Swift implements in order to use memory efficiently. So the way it works is, let's say you have a resource, like an array, for example, right? And this array, this resource is going to be used by different components. So whenever each one of them accesses the array, they are actually accessing the same object in memory. Instead of traditionally, if you have an array and someone else also wants it, it would create a copy out of it. But in this case, they are not going to do that. They are going to be pointing to the same object in memory, so you don't have to duplicate memory, like wasted memory, right? Until one of the actors wants to modify the object, then a copy is created. and then you can work on your copy and keep modifying whatever you want. That's on the manual. But before you do that, you only work on visualizing the same object, and that reduces the memory usage of the application.
Great, and also helps with changing information between components as well, right? When we work on the same structure, like on memory. Great answer. Next one. What is the difference between open and public keywords in Swift?
Open versus public. Okay, so well, basically, whenever you have let's say a variable or a class or something that you are going to be using in your code, you can either assign open, private, and public. Now, between private and public, the difference has been clear for quite some time, because from the very beginning it was like that, right? But nowadays, the public category was basically divided into two, public and open. Now, what's the difference between the two of them? The difference is if you can, in one of them, which is public, you can only access the content, right? So if you have, for example, a class in Java that is public, you can access that public class, but you cannot, for example, create a subclass out of that class, because it's not for that. It's just public to access the content. The open gives you a little bit more of access, because you can access the information, but also you can subclass that class into another class you may want. It's a bit like a bunch of public and classes and subclasses words, but it's basically that. The open keyword is going to give you a little bit more access to subclass the content to wherever you want, and the public is just for, let's say, read only.
Okay, great. Next one. When to use strong, weak, and unknown references?
Okay, so this refers to whenever an object is going to include another object as part of its definition, right? So the usual way it works, and the way we usually understand it in object-oriented programming, is by using the strong reference. So let's say, for example, a car has wheels, right? Or tires, has tires. So that's a strong reference, because the car, part of the definition of the car is that it has to have tires. So it's something required for that object. Now, the weak reference is backwards. Usually the strong reference is used for a parent to reference a child, something that belongs to it. The weak reference is backwards. Whenever the child references the parent, for example, the tire belongs to a car, but that doesn't mean the tire cannot exist without the car. The tire can exist. It can be a tire like just to the left, right, on the side. It doesn't really need to have a car. So it may belong to a car, but it's not required for it to belong to a car. So that's why it's weak. It's not required. Okay, it's nice to have, but it's not. It can be null. It can be voided, right? And what's the other one you asked for?
Unknown.
Unknown. That one is it's not quite common, to be honest with you. I haven't used that. I don't recall an instance when I had to use that one. But if I have it right, an unknown reference is whenever you have two objects that require each other. Like, let's say two strong references between two objects. None of them can exist without the other, like a recursive dependence. So that would be an unknown reference. But to be honest with you, I haven't have to face those. I don't know which circumstance something like that would be.
A neat example, it would be like a mother and daughter. Like the mother can only be a mother with the daughter, and the daughter can only be a daughter with the mother. It's some way of.
If she doesn't have a daughter, she's not a mother.
Yeah.
That was kind of weird.
Yeah. Okay. Next one. What do you understand about the sealed classes? This one is for Kotlin.
Okay. So sealed classes were introduced for Kotlin. Basically, what you do when you seal a class is that you protect it against reusage of that class. So let's say you are creating an API, which is going to be used by third parties. So when you define a class as sealed, that means that's it. right? That class cannot be modified. So, like subclass, nothing. It's that, and that's it. So that's basically what a
Okay,
single class is. It
great.
cannot be extended. It cannot be a single class cannot be
Extended, but can it be accessed?
yeah, it can be accessed and used, but it cannot be
Okay,
extended.
great. Next one. Explain the activity lifecycle.
Okay, so in Android, the activity lifecycle means all the steps an activity goes through when presented to the user, right? So, for example, you have the start of the class, then you have the moment when the class is running. At a certain point, the class the activity may pause, and if it's paused because perhaps it's waiting information from someone else, then it can resume and it goes back to the running state. And finally, the activity is stopped at a certain point and destroyed whenever it's just at the crash, right? So it's basically all the states that activity goes through when interacting with the user.
Nice. And a follow-up for that would be suspend function, specifically in Kotlin as well. For this activity like cycle, what it is and why do I use it?
Okay, so yeah, this is as you said, particular for Kotlin. It doesn't exist in Java. It's something Kotlin introduced. And basically, what Kotlin did was creating a similar lifecycle, but for functions. So you have functions in Kotlin that can go again through the same cycle, right? They start, they may be paused, put on hold, they may resume, they may stop, they may go through different states. So it's something similar to the activity lifecycle, but for functions. That's, I think, the easier way to define it.
Yes, awesome. So the next one would be differentiate between launch and join and async await in Kotlin.
Okay, so this talks about something introduced in Kotlin that is the asynchronous code. So basically, in Kotlin, you may have functions that do not run in the typical linear flow of the program, right? In Java, typical Java, without threads, everything is linear. It runs in the same line. But then you start introducing threads, and they allow you to run some things in parallel. And in Kotlin, these functions are used to manage all this parallelism. So, for example, you mentioned several of them, but let's say, for example, await. When you set something to await, basically it's expecting a result. So you run a function that it is going to be waiting until it gets a certain result. This is often used whenever you interact with some other applications that are going to give you something, right? So that cannot be linear because you do not know when it's going to end. It doesn't depend on you. So you simply have no information about it. So the await is going to allow you to say, this is running until I get this. And once that's done, I continue with this other flow. So that's basically to manage the parallel flow of the program, these functions.
Okay, nice. Did you talk about the launch and join as well? Like,
yeah, these are used. Launch and join are pretty much the same, but they are used for coroutines. So in Kotlin, for example, you may have this. You may be in an activity, and you need to launch something within the same activity. Let's say, I don't know, clock. Let's say you will have a clock running there. So it's not like you're talking about the main flow of your program. It's just like a side component, but still you need to manage it. So you use these launch and join commands to run these little coroutines within your code.
Okay, great. Okay, last one. What does program to interfaces, not implementations, mean?
Okay, so this is also a modern way of working with app development, and again, development in general. The way I understand it is the main focus is on interfaces, meaning when we start developing project or organizing project, the very first thing we're going to be focused on are the interfaces, right? So which screens are going to be presented to the user, what they have to do, how they interact with each other. So the idea of this is, again, make the development more agile. So the client holds, so to speak, the control of the project's development, right? Because they wouldn't understand code, but they do understand interfaces. So they are able to like manage or keep up with the project development through the interfaces. So it's basically a way of work.
Okay, like componentizing the activities, the interfaces, just like we did with the components, right?
Yeah, but this is the difference. I would say is interfaces are more oriented for the clients, and components are more oriented with the development team, right? The development team understand components, no problem. But if you go to the client and say, this is going to be activity, they can't understand it, right? So
Yeah.
it's more like in their language.
Okay, awesome. Jose, great talk today. I hope you had some fun while doing this with us.
Pretty interesting. Nice questions you have there. Yeah.
Thanks a lot for participating. So to everybody else, thanks for joining us today in this mock interview episode. And if you like it, please give a thumbs up on the video and comment down below what else you want to see us doing, like or what all the interviews you want to see. And I hope you have a nice day and see you in another one. Happy coding.